When the dust finally began to settle, Europe was no longer the same. The plague had killed kings and peasants, monks and merchants, mothers, children and soldiers. Historians estimate that between 75 and 200 million people died within a single generation, a number so vast that no chronicler could truly comprehend it. Cities fell silent. Church bells, once marking the rhythm of life, now tolled only to remind the living how many had already gone. But the end of the plague didn't bring peace. It brought emptiness. Europe had lost nearly half of its workforce. Fields lay abandoned, crops withered, villages vanished from maps. In many places, there were no hands left to bury the dead, nor to harvest the living fruit of the earth. And yet from that void, something unexpected began to grow. With fewer laborers available, those who survived became more valuable. Peasants demanded better pay, and feudal lords were forced to concede. The economy began to shift. Power, once monopolized by the nobility and the church, started slowly but unmistakably to slip toward the hands of common people. Faith, however, did not emerge unscathed. The suffering had been so overwhelming that doubt began to spread like a second contagion. If the plague was divine punishment, why did it strike the innocent and the devout alike? Why did priests die beside thieves? Why did prayers go unanswered? Those questions echoed for generations, cracking the once absolute authority of the church and paving the way for the changes to come. The Renaissance, humanism, and eventually, the Reformation. The Black Death had destroyed bodies, but it had also awakened minds. Science, long buried under superstition, began to stir. Physicians who once relied on prayers and astrology started to observe, to record symptoms, to compare patterns. It was the beginning of a new way of thinking, slow, hesitant, but unstoppable. The horror had taught humanity a brutal lesson. Understanding the world could be more powerful than fearing it. Yet the collective trauma left scars that would last for centuries. People learned to fear touch, to distrust strangers, to see the air itself as a threat. Cities that had once welcomed travelers began to close their gates. Isolation, once a desperate measure, became a cultural reflex. Not all lessons were rational, though. In many places, guilt and paranoia continued to rule. Outsiders were shunned. Minorities were blamed again for provoking God's wrath. The same fear that had fueled fanaticism at the height of the plague still whispered in the shadows long after it was gone. And still, life found a way back. Markets reopened between outbreaks. Bells rang again, this time for births, not burials. The generation that grew up after the plague inherited a darker world, but also a stronger one. A world that had stared into the abyss and somehow survived it. The 14th century would end with more chaos. The 100 Years' War reigniting suffering across Europe. But nothing, not even war, would match the silent devastation of the Black Death. The plague never vanished entirely. It returned in smaller waves for centuries, reminding Europe that the invisible killer was never truly gone. But it never again held the same power. The Great Fire had burned out, leaving only embers in humanity's collective memory. And perhaps the greatest legacy of the Black Death wasn't destruction, but transformation. It reshaped economies, shook religions, inspired art and new ways of thought. It pushed humanity, unwillingly, into the modern age. A world that would slowly come to value observation, hygiene, and reason over fear. Centuries later, when new pandemics struck, humanity looked back at that century when it all began. The masks, the fear, the isolation, echoes of a time that was never truly forgotten. Because in the end, the Black Death was more than a disease. It was a turning point, the catastrophe that almost ended Western civilization, and the crucible that forced it to evolve. The 14th century tried to end humanity, but it was there that humanity learned, for the first time, how to fight the invisible. But even as the 14th century faded into history, one truth refused to disappear. The plague had not been defeated, only forgotten. For generations, Europe carried on, confident that the nightmare belonged to another age. Yet in hidden corners of the world, the bacteria endured, waiting in rodents and fleas, in the dark spaces between trade routes and forgotten ports. Centuries later, it would return in eruptions of fear in London, in Marseille, in Asia, reminders that the past is never entirely buried. And today, scientists know something the people of the Middle Ages never could. Yersinia pestis still exists. It survives in remote reservoirs across the globe, mutating, adapting, biding its time in ways that defy simple prediction. The story of the Black Death is often told as if it ended in the 1350s, as if humanity emerged wiser and safer, as if the door to that horror had finally closed. But the truth is more unsettling. The same conditions that once allowed the plague to sweep across continents, crowded cities, global trade, shifting climates, are still with us. The world is more connected now than it ever was in the 14th century. A single infection can cross oceans in hours, not months. And so the Black Death lingers not only in history books, but in possibility. A ghost in the bloodstream of civilization. A shadow waiting beyond the edge of certainty. A reminder that humanity's greatest enemy has never been what we can see, but what we cannot. The 14th century tried to end humanity. And though we survived, the lesson remains. What came once can come again.